What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks onto a morning talk show expecting a simple chat and instead faces a host who seems determined to tear him down in front of millions? In just 29 seconds, a single comment would turn a friendly interview into one of the most shocking moments in British television history. This is the story of how Lorraine Kelly pushed Gary Oldman too far. Gary Oldman sat down on the bright purple couch of the Lorraine Kelly show, smiling politely as the studio audience clapped. He'd been on countless talk shows before, promoting films, sharing stories, always the consummate professional. Today was supposed to be no different. He was there to talk about his latest project, maybe share a funny behind-the-scenes story or two. But from the moment Lorraine Kelly opened her mouth, something felt off. "So Gary," Lorraine began, leaning back in her chair with a smirk that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I have to say, when I heard you were coming on the show, I thought, well, this should be interesting. You're not exactly known for being the easiest person to work with, are you?" The audience went quiet. Gary's smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered. "I'm sorry, what?" Lorraine waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, come on. We've all heard the stories. Difficult. Demanding. I mean, let's be honest here." Sitting to Lorraine's right was her regular panelist, Christine, a woman in her 50s who always seemed to agree with everything Lorraine said. Christine nodded enthusiastically. Yes. There have been rumors." Gary shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable, but trying to stay professional. "I think you might be confusing me with someone else. I've always tried to be respectful to everyone I work with. I pride myself on being collaborative, actually. Some of my closest friends are people I've worked with over the years." "Really?" Lorraine's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. "Because I spoke to someone who worked on one of your films, and they said you were, how did they put it, a nightmare." "Yes, that was the word. Nightmare." "Who said that?" Gary asked, his tone still measured, but with an edge creeping in. "Because I'd love to know who's making these accusations, so I can actually address them properly." Lorraine waved her hand dismissively. "I can't reveal my sources, Gary. That's journalism. But trust me, they were very credible." "Credible," Gary repeated slowly. "Right. So you're going to sit here and tell me someone called me a nightmare, but you won't tell me who. And you expect me to just accept that as fact?" The other panelist, David, a younger man in his 30s, who usually stayed quiet during controversial moments, looked down at his notes uncomfortably. Even he seemed to sense this was going too far. He shifted in his chair, uncrossed and recrossed his legs, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. Gary took a deep breath. You could see his chest rise and fall as he counted to 10 in his head, trying to maintain his composure. "Look, I'm not sure who you spoke to or what their agenda might be, but I can assure you that's not accurate. I take my work seriously, yes, but that doesn't make me difficult. In fact, I've worked with some of the same directors and crew members multiple times over the years. Would they keep coming back if I was such a nightmare?" "Taking your work seriously," Lorraine repeated, air quoting with her fingers in a way that made the gesture seem mocking. Her voice had taken on a sing-song quality that made everything she said sound insincere. "Is that what we're calling it now? Christine, what do you think? When someone's been called difficult by multiple sources, is it really just about taking work seriously?" Christine jumped in eagerly, leaning forward like she'd been waiting for this moment. "Well, Lorraine, I think when there's smoke, there's usually fire, isn't there? I mean, these things don't come from nowhere. And you know, I've heard similar things from other people in the industry. Not naming names, of course, but the stories are out there." "What stories?" Gary asked, turning to face Christine directly. "Please enlighten me. What stories have you heard?" Christine's eyes widened, clearly not expecting to be challenged directly. She looked to Lorraine for support. "Well, you know, just general things. About temperament. About being demanding." "Demanding," Gary repeated. Could you be more specific? Because demanding excellence is different from being difficult. Demanding proper safety protocols is different from being difficult. What exactly are you accusing me of? Gary's jaw tightened. You could see him making the decision to stay calm, to not let this get to him. I came here today to talk about my film, not to defend myself against vague accusations from unnamed sources. Oh, touchy, are we? Lorraine leaned forward, her voice dripping with condescension. She had that look in her eyes, the look of someone who thinks they've already won. See, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Can't handle a little bit of honest questioning. This is what happens when you're not used to people being real with you, Gary. Everyone in Hollywood probably kisses your feet, but here we tell it like it is. This is Britain. We don't do all that fake niceness. Gary's hands gripped the armrest of the couch. His knuckles were white. There's a difference between being real and being rude, and what you're doing right now isn't honest questioning. It's an ambush. You invited me here under the pretense of discussing my film, and instead, you've spent the entire time attacking my character based on anonymous sources. Ambush, Lorraine scoffed, rolling her eyes dramatically for the camera. Oh, please. If asking a few simple questions is an ambush, then maybe you're even more thin-skinned than I thought. What's next? Are you going to cry? The audience gasped. Someone in the third row actually said, "Oh my God," loud enough for the microphones to pick up. The audience was completely silent now. A few people looked at each other, unsure of what they were witnessing. This wasn't normal morning television banter. This was an attack. Gary remained composed, but his voice had an edge to it now, sharp as broken glass. I think there's a difference between honest questioning and being disrespectful. You've made several accusations without any evidence, and frankly, I'm not sure what your goal is here. Is this how you treat all your guests? Or am I special? My goal? Lorraine laughed, but it was a harsh sound, brittle and forced. It echoed around the studio in an uncomfortable way. My goal is to have a real conversation instead of the usual boring promotional nonsense. But I suppose you'd prefer everyone just fawn all over you and ask softball questions about your process or whatever. Tell us about your inspiration. Tell us about your journey. Blah, blah, blah. Is that what you want? I want respect, Gary said simply. The same respect I would give you if our positions were reversed. That's not asking for fawning. That's asking for basic human decency. Christine interjected again, her voice shrill. Basic human decency? Oh, that's rich coming from someone who allegedly makes people's lives miserable on set. Allegedly, Gary emphasized. That's the key word you just used. Allegedly. Which means you don't actually know if it's true. You're just repeating gossip. David finally spoke up, his voice hesitant but determined. Maybe we could talk about the actual film? I'd love to hear about your character's journey. I read the script, and I thought it was fascinating how your character evolves. Lorraine shot him a look that could freeze water. David, I'm conducting this interview. If you want to lead a show, get your own. David's face flushed, red, and he went quiet again. Gary watched this exchange, and something seemed to shift in his expression. His eyes moved from Lorraine to David and back again. He sat up a little straighter, like he'd just understood something important. You know what? I think it's interesting how you just spoke to your colleague there. Really interesting. David tried to do something helpful, tried to move this interview in a productive direction, and you shut him down immediately. Seems like maybe being difficult isn't something you're actually concerned about. It's just a convenient weapon to use against guests. A way to create drama. Excuse me? Lorraine's eyes narrowed dangerously. Her whole body tensed, like a cat about to pounce. Are you seriously trying to turn this around on me right now? I'm not trying to do anything, Gary said, his voice steady but firm. The calmness in his tone somehow made his words more powerful. I'm making an observation. You heard me. You've spent the last 5 minutes making unfounded accusations about my character, And when your own panelist tried to move the conversation forward, tried to actually do what this interview was supposed to be about, you snapped at him. You embarrassed him on live television. So perhaps we should talk about professional behavior. Perhaps we should talk about who's actually being difficult here. Christine gasped dramatically, her hand flying to her chest like she'd been physically struck. How dare you speak to Lorraine that way? This is her show. She built this show from the ground up. She's a legend in this industry. Who do you think you are? I'm someone who was invited here as a guest, Gary replied, turning to face Christine again. His voice remained calm, which seemed to infuriate her more. I'm someone who deserves the same courtesy that any guest should receive. And frankly, I'm someone who's losing patience with this charade. It being her show doesn't give her the right to be rude to guests or her staff, Gary replied calmly. Lorraine's face was turning red now, a deep crimson that started at her neck and spread upward. Her breathing was becoming audible, quick and shallow. I have been doing this for years. Years. I know how to conduct an interview, and I don't need some actor, some Hollywood type who thinks he's God's gift to cinema, telling me how to do my job. I've interviewed prime ministers. I've interviewed royalty. I've interviewed people far more important than you. And I don't need some talk show host making up stories about me on national television, Gary countered, his voice rising slightly but still controlled. I don't need someone who's never worked a day on a film set telling millions of people that I'm difficult based on nothing but gossip and hearsay. You talk about journalistic integrity, about asking the hard questions, but what you're doing isn't journalism. It's a hit piece. It's character assassination dressed up as an interview. The tension in the studio was thick enough to cut. You could feel it pressing down on everyone in the room. Audience members were leaning forward in their seats, not quite believing what they were seeing unfold. Some had their phones out, recording. Others just stared, mouths slightly open, caught between shock and fascination. One woman in the front row was shaking her head slowly, her expression one of deep disapproval, though it wasn't clear who she disapproved of more. Lorraine stood up suddenly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. The sound made several people in the audience jump. She was pointing her finger at Gary now, jabbing it through the air like a weapon. You know what your problem is? You think you're better than everyone else. You think because you've won some awards and been in some films that you can come on my show and disrespect me. Well, let me tell you something, Mr. Oldman. Awards don't mean anything when you're a terrible person. Being talented doesn't give you the right to be cruel. Gary stood up as well, and he was calmer than Lorraine, which somehow made his words hit harder. I haven't disrespected you. I've responded to your disrespect. There's a difference. And honestly, I'm starting to understand why you might have trouble getting honest guests if this is how you treat them. Get out, Lorraine said, her voice shaking with anger. Get off my show. Gladly, Gary replied. He unclipped his microphone with steady hands. But before I go, I just want to say something to anyone watching at home who might be dealing with someone who treats them the way you've treated me today. You don't have to accept it. You don't have to sit there and take someone being cruel to you just because they have power or a platform. You can walk away. Christine stood up as well, her voice shrill. Oh, playing the victim now, are we? This is ridiculous. Lorraine asked you some tough questions, and you couldn't handle it. Gary turned to look at her. She didn't ask tough questions. She made accusations. There's a difference. And deep down, you know that. But you're so used to agreeing with everything she says that you've forgotten how to think for yourself. Christine's mouth opened and closed like a fish. No sound came out. David, still sitting, looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. He kept his eyes fixed on his papers, clearly hoping to avoid becoming the next target. Lorraine was breathing heavily, her hands balled into fists at her sides. I don't have to stand here and listen to this. Security, get him out of here. I'm already leaving, Gary said, setting his microphone down on the couch. You don't need security to remove someone who's walking out on their own, but I suppose the drama is good for ratings, isn't it? Two security guards appeared from the wings, looking uncertain about what they were supposed to do, since Gary was already heading toward the exit. "This is unbelievable," Lorraine shouted after him. "You come on my show, you insult me, you insult my panelists, and then you just walk off? This is the most unprofessional thing I've ever seen." Gary stopped and turned back. The camera caught his face perfectly, and there was something almost sad in his expression. "You really don't see it, do you? You really think I'm the one who's been unprofessional here?" "Of course you are," Christine chimed in, having found her voice again. "Walking off in the middle of an interview, it's childish." "I'd rather be childish than cruel," Gary said quietly, "and I'd rather walk away than sit here and pretend this is okay." Lorraine threw her hands up. "Fine, go. We don't need you anyway. We have plenty of guests who would be honored to be on this show." "Then I hope you treat them better than you treated me," Gary replied. He looked at David, who finally met his eyes. "Good luck to you. You seem like a decent person. I hope you find somewhere that values that." David gave the smallest nod, and you could see gratitude flicker across his face. As Gary walked off the set, past the cameras and crew members who all stood frozen, watching this unfold, Lorraine called out one last time, "And don't expect to ever be invited back. You're finished on this show." Gary didn't respond. He just kept walking, his head held high, his dignity intact. The camera stayed on Lorraine, who was still standing, her chest heaving with anger. Christine stood beside her, looking vindicated. David remained seated, staring at his notes, his face pale. "Well," Lorraine said, trying to regain her composure, and failing. That was certainly something. I apologize to our viewers for that display of ego and unprofessionalism." Someone in the audience coughed. It was the kind of cough that happens when people are uncomfortable and don't know what else to do. Lorraine sat back down, smoothing her skirt, with shaking hands. "Some people just can't handle real journalism, real questions. They want everything to be easy and soft and... She trailed off, seeming to realize that continuing might make things worse. Christine, ever the loyal ally, jumped in. "Absolutely, Lorraine. You were just doing your job. If he couldn't handle a few simple questions about his reputation, then that's on him." But even Christine's words sounded hollow now. The studio audience wasn't clapping. They weren't nodding. They were just sitting there, silent, watching. David finally spoke, his voice quiet. "Maybe we should go to a commercial break." "No!" Lorraine snapped. "No. We're going to continue. We're not going to let one diva actor ruin our show." She turned to the audience with a forced smile. "Right? We're okay, aren't we?" A few people clapped half-heartedly. Most didn't. "You know what?" Lorraine continued, her voice getting higher and faster, the way people's voices do when they're trying to convince themselves of something. "I think what we just witnessed says everything about the state of celebrity culture today. These people think they're untouchable. They think they can just do whatever they want, and everyone will bow down to them. Well, not on my show. Not here." Christine nodded vigorously. "Absolutely right, Lorraine. Someone needed to take him down a peg." "That's not what happened, though, is it?" David said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at him. He looked surprised at himself for speaking, but he continued. "I mean, you asked him some pretty harsh questions right from the start. He tried to defend himself, and then it just escalated." Lorraine's eyes went cold. "David, are you seriously taking his side right now?" "I'm not taking anyone's side," David said, but his voice wavered. "I'm just saying that maybe if we'd started with questions about his film instead of accusations about his character, things might have gone differently." "Well, thank you for your expert opinion," Lorraine said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I'll be sure to consult you next time I need advice on how to do the job I've been doing successfully for decades." David went quiet again, but something had changed in his face. He looked less scared now and more disappointed. The rest of the show continued, but it was awkward. Lorraine kept trying to move on to other segments, talking about cooking and fashion and celebrity gossip. But there was an elephant in the room that nobody could ignore. Every few minutes, she'd make another comment about Gary, about how unprofessional he was, how disrespectful, how typical of Hollywood types. Christine agreed with every word. David said nothing. The audience remained subdued. Usually, Lorraine's audience was lively and engaged, laughing at her jokes, clapping at appropriate moments, but now they just sat there, polite but distant, like they were watching something they wished they weren't part of. Behind the scenes, crew members were whispering to each other. Some were checking their phones, probably looking to see if any clips had already made it online. Everyone knew they'd just witnessed something significant, something that would be talked about. Lorraine, despite her attempts to appear unfazed, kept fidgeting. She'd touch her hair, adjust her jacket, shift in her seat. Every movement betrayed the confidence she was trying to project with her words. "I want to be clear," she said, during a segment about holiday recipes, randomly bringing the topic back to Gary, even though they'd moved on. "I have no regrets about how I conducted that interview. As journalists, as hosts, we have a responsibility to ask the hard questions, to not just let celebrities come on and promote their projects without any accountability." The chef who was there to demonstrate a Christmas pudding recipe nodded politely, but looked uncomfortable. He clearly just wanted to talk about pudding. After the chef segment ended, and they cut to another commercial break, you could see Lorraine lean over to Christine. The microphones didn't pick up what she said, but her face was tense, worried. Christine patted her arm reassuringly. David stood up during the break and walked over to talk to one of the producers. The conversation looked serious. The producer kept glancing over at Lorraine, then back at David, nodding. When they came back from commercial, Lorraine's smile was even more forced than before. "We have a wonderful show still ahead," she said, but her voice lacked its usual energy. "Coming up, we'll be talking about winter fashion trends and... She looked down at her notes, seeming to lose her place. "New Year's resolutions," Christine supplied helpfully. "Yes, New Year's resolutions?" "Thank you, Christine." Lorraine's gratitude seemed genuine, like she was clinging to Christine's support as the only stable thing in a show that had gone completely off the rails. The fashion segment came and went. The fashion expert, a stylish woman in her 40s, kept the conversation professional and focused, clearly determined not to let anything controversial happen on her watch. Lorraine seemed grateful for this, participating in the discussion without her usual sharp edge. But then they got to the New Year's resolution segment, and Lorraine couldn't help herself. "You know," she said, addressing the camera directly, "I think one resolution we should all make is to not let anyone walk all over us, to stand up for ourselves, even when people with power try to intimidate us." Christine nodded. Here. That's a wonderful resolution, Lorraine." David, who had been quiet for most of the remaining show, finally spoke up again. "I think another good resolution is to treat people with kindness, even when we disagree with them." There was a pause. Lorraine stared at David. Christine stared at David. The audience seemed to hold its breath. "Of course," Lorraine said stiffly. "Kindness is important, when it's deserved." "Shouldn't everyone deserve kindness?" David asked. His voice was gentle, not confrontational, but the question hung in the air like a challenge. "Some people forfeit the right to kindness when they behave badly," Lorraine replied. "And who decides who's behaved badly?" David continued. "Who gets to make that judgment?" Lorraine's face was getting red again. "David, I'm not sure what's gotten into you today, but this is not the time or place for philosophy debates." "I'm just asking questions," David said. "Isn't that what we're supposed to do?" Christine let out a nervous laugh. "Well, this has been quite the show, hasn't it? Never a dull moment on Lorraine." But nobody else was laughing. Lorraine wrapped up the show earlier than usual. "That's all we have time for today," she said, even though there were still 10 minutes left in the broadcast. "Thank you for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow." As the credits rolled, the camera stayed on the set for a moment longer than usual. You could see Lorraine standing up, pulling off her microphone more roughly than necessary. Christine followed her, talking rapidly, probably trying to reassure her. David remained seated, watching them go, his expression unreadable. The studio audience filed out quietly. Usually, there would be chatter, excitement, people discussing their favorite moments of the show. Today, people left in near silence, exchanging glances that said everything words couldn't. In the green room, where Gary Oldman had waited before the show began, his jacket still hung on the back of a chair. Someone would have to mail it to him. He'd left so quickly, so completely, that he'd forgotten it. Or maybe he hadn't forgotten. Maybe he'd just wanted to be gone so badly that a jacket seemed like a small price to pay for his dignity. The show's producers gathered in an office somewhere in the building, undoubtedly discussing what had happened, what it meant, what they should do about it. But out in the studio, with the cameras off and the lights dimming, the set looked different somehow. The bright purple couch, which usually seemed cheerful and welcoming, now looked garish and cold. One of the camera operators, a man who'd been working on the show for 5 years, shook his head as he packed up his equipment. "Never seen anything like that," he muttered to his colleague. "Think he'll press charges or something?" the colleague asked. "For what?" "She didn't touch him. Just words." "Sometimes words hurt more," the colleague replied. They finished packing in silence. In her dressing room, Lorraine sat in front of her mirror, staring at her reflection. Christine stood behind her, still talking, still trying to make it all okay. "You were right to call him out," Christine said. "You were absolutely right. He came on your show with an attitude, and you weren't going to stand for it." But Lorraine's reflection didn't look convinced. She looked tired, uncertain. Like maybe, just maybe, she was starting to wonder if she'd made a mistake. David walked past her open door, saw her sitting there, and paused. For a moment, it looked like he might say something. But then he just kept walking, heading toward the exit, toward fresh air, toward anywhere that wasn't here. The makeup artist who came in to help Lorraine remove her television makeup worked in silence. Usually, this time was full of chatter, recapping funny moments from the show, making plans for the next day. Today, the makeup artist worked quickly, efficiently, saying nothing. When she was done, Lorraine looked at herself in the mirror again. Without the television makeup, without the bright lights, without the camera, she looked smaller somehow. More human, more vulnerable. "It'll blow over," Christine said, though she sounded less certain now. "These things always blow over. By next week, no one will even remember." But they both knew that wasn't true. In the age of social media, in the age of instant replay and viral clips, nothing blows over anymore. Everything lives forever, ready to be watched and rewatched, analyzed, and discussed. Somewhere, right at that very moment, someone was uploading the clip of Gary Oldman walking off the set. Someone else was sharing it. Someone else was commenting. And someone else was forming an opinion about what they'd just witnessed. In his hotel room across the city, Gary Oldman sat on the edge of his bed, his phone turned off, his mind quiet. He wasn't thinking about the show. He wasn't worrying about the fallout. He'd said what he needed to say, done what he needed to do, and walked away with his head held high. That was enough.